Hey folks, welcome back to In the Chill of the Night, episode number 14. I know we'd like to remind you, please go ahead and check out our website, www.rffactor.com. You'll find all sorts of content on there related to not only true crime stories and investigations that are associated with those true crime stories, but also leadership content. Hey Pete, how you doing today?
Good, Ray. How are you?
I know we're joined by a great guest, Mike Bouchard. Mike, I'm very interested in your take on this investigation, which is the Beltway sniper. I remember I was a young trooper when this was going. Actually, I was a detective at the time this was going on, and I had to remind myself when I look back at the date here that this is actually after September 11th. Which is interesting because for some reason in my mind's eye, I'm thinking it's before September 11th, but it wasn't. And I think there's some significance to that too, based on how police respond, how investigators respond, how the federal agencies for which you were a part of at the time all come together to share information and certainly identify the perpetrator. So without further ado, how are you, sir? And hey, tell us about yourself.
Good to be with you guys. I started as a police officer in the late 70s in Connecticut, and after getting my degree in arson investigation, I joined ATF in Washington DC and worked a number of different assignments in Washington and a bunch of different supervisory assignments from intelligence, and eventually I retired as assistant director for field operations. But during the Beltway sniper investigation, I was a special agent in charge of the Baltimore Field Division, which covered Maryland and Delaware. So a number of the shootings, in fact, the sniper case originated in Maryland. So as the special agent in charge, I was the ATF lead on that case.
I just realized that this is going to be problematic because you're both from Connecticut here. I think you're going to team up on me here.
I just want to say that I knew him when. Okay, I knew him when he was a nobody in the police department in Connecticut. He won't admit this, but I taught him everything he knows. But no.
So did you guys know each other at the police department level?
Yeah, we were working some organized crime arsons. I was a local, and Pete was ATF.
Pete was in the ATF by then.
Yeah, and we worked together, and then Pete was instrumental in helping me get on with ATF.
Wow!
I ended up being in Washington.
My old partner, when I was a local cop, became his partner on his job.
You kidding?
Yeah,
absolutely. That's how we met. We're friends. I mean, we socialized together. So I know him when, and you're not going to find a better guy than Mike Bouchard. I'll tell you.
Before we get started with the story, tell me about the best pizza over there.
Tell him the truth now. Go ahead.
Well, I personally like modern, but this is my number one pick.
Yeah, that's what I tell him. I tell him that all the time.
All right. Okay.
Pepe's has a place down in Alexandria, Virginia. I think you sent it to me.
Yeah. And there's a good place in New Jersey called Patsy's in Hoboken. That's a pretty good place. Grimaldi's, really. It's Grimaldi's. But I used to love the pizza there, but it doesn't compare to modern.
No.
Yeah. Well, I shouldn't say this, but just the other day I went to Whole Foods and I know it's commercialized, but wow, it was pretty good pizza.
Oh, so they cook it. Anything they cook there in a good hot oven, I guess
that's right.
I mean, how bad can you ruin a piece of dough and some nice sauce?
Oh, you'd be surprised. So Mike, I know I interrupted you, but please, I'm very interested in this story.
Yeah. So I became the special agent in charge in Baltimore in the summer of 2002. I was just coming off working the 9/11, the Pentagon scene. So, we're just reeling from getting over that. And then I had met Chief Moose, who was the police chief in Montgomery County where most of the shootings occurred. So he and I had met, and we talked about working some different gun cases jointly, et cetera. So he and I already had a relationship, which was very important as this whole case evolved. So on September 2nd, I was at the Maryland Police Chiefs conference out in Ocean City, which is about 2 hours away from D.C. And we were all preparing to go out to the IACP meeting that same weekend. And then these shootings occurred in Montgomery County. First at a Michael's store, a bullet went through a window. Nobody knew where it came from. Nobody thought much about it. The next evening, another store nearby in a strip mall, a gentleman walking the parking lot from his car, going to get groceries, goes down in the parking lot. People thought he had a heart attack. They run up to him, which is across from a police station, found he had been shot. No witnesses. He eventually passed. So in Montgomery County is a relatively peaceful county. They would have 3 or 4 murders in a year. The following morning,
at this point, this is really, it's not really at your attention yet at the federal government. This is all just what's perceived to be local issues at the time.
Correct. And the following morning, 3 different people were shot. A woman sitting on a bench waiting for a car, waiting for the bus, a lady vacuuming her car, and another guy cutting the grass at a car dealership. All 3 of them were shot. The gentleman who was cutting the grass, people thought he got hit by shrapnel from the lawnmower to kick something up. So they didn't treat that as a shooting until they got him in the hospital and found he had a bullet wound. So that morning of September 3rd, there were 3 murders within about 2 miles of each other. My assistant special agent in charge showed up at the scene along with the resident agent in charge, and they called me to tell me they were going to be assisting Montgomery County in these shootings on the ballistics if they needed any assistance. So I came back. I decided I was going to leave the chief's meeting and come back and meet with Chief Moose and see if there's any assistance that we could offer, because the ATF laboratory was about a mile from the Montgomery County Police headquarters. So I came back that afternoon, met with Chief Moose, and then right around 5 or 6 o'clock, a gentleman in Washington, D.C., about 100 yards over the line from Montgomery County, Maryland, was shot crossing the street. Now, this poor gentleman was getting prescription medicine for his wife, who had cancer and was bedridden, and he was shot through the head. So now we knew, we had an issue, but, we started looking at, each victim. There were some women, different race. They were all doing different things, different ages. So we're kind of wondering, not likely to be gang related. What's going on? Are there any commonalities here? They all happen in different locations. So we started a task force that following day. Montgomery County, ATF, the local FBI office came, and the Maryland State Police. So we started working this thing. And of course, the media, with Washington being a fishbowl, the media took over, and they were just, all kinds of theories about what's going on. So there was a day in between, there were no shootings. And then a day later, a woman 50 miles south of Montgomery County was shot in the back walking into a Michael's craft store in the parking lot. Fortunately for her, she lived. So the media started jumping on this, saying it had to be a trained sniper, all these types of theories that were really screwing us up. And then they started saying maybe it's a military, a person from the military heading south to one of the military bases. But at the same time, we had a witness in one of the shootings on October 3rd who said he saw a white box truck speeding from the scene. And this was one of the most crucial tips that caused a lot of grief in this case.
Hey, Mike, can I also ask you something? Because I had lived down at D.C. I had an assignment down there, and I had got to be pretty friendly with guy that worked for the FBI, that we would sort of on the weekends, we'd sort of socialize in that area where these events were taking place. And in fact, I think we went to the one gas station, the one or two gas stations that were involved here. I think there was actually an FBI employee that was shot too, right?
Yes, Linda Franklin was killed
right.
at a Home Depot.
That's right. Yeah. Tragic. But needless to say that this is a very busy area, a huge population. There's people are nervous here.
Well, I could add to that. I had retired from ATF 2 years before, and I still lived down there in Northern Virginia, and so did my family. And that one you just mentioned about the Home Depot, my daughter calls me, in the midst of all this, once this hits the media, I mean, people all over the region, they're, instead of gassing up their cars, standing holding the nozzle in the tank, they set it on auto. They jump back in the car and they're hiding. They're all bent down below the seat. People are parking in shopping center parking lots, and they're running zigzag patterns because somebody said if you run a zigzag, it'd be harder to shoot you. And they're running. I'm actually watching these people running zigzag patterns. So the one at the Home Depot, I get a telephone call. Now, this is going on for days. The media is like 24/7 with this thing. And my daughter calls on the phone, and she says, I'm in the shopping, Stop and Shop or whatever it was, Safeway next door to the Home Depot, and they got us locked in. They won't let us out. There's been a shooting out front. So I'm yelling at her on the phone, what the hell are you doing out there? Right. But like everybody's nuts. The whole region is upset, right? I mean, Mike, it's just pandemonium out there, the way people are reacting, because there's no rhyme or reason to what these guys are doing right now.
Yeah, it got really crazy and then the pressure with the political pressure and the media. There were over 1,000 media credentials given out at that site in Rockville, Maryland. So every day, the Chief Moose had started to do about 5 or 6 press conferences a day, which I joined him on, and we started talking, saying, we got to pare these things back because we don't know what's motivating these shooters. If we keep, if this is vanity that they're getting off on, us holding all these press conferences probably, helping these guys, feel more confident. So we said, look, let's scale this back to just once a day, whether a shooting occurs or not. We're going to have a set time every day that we can go out and meet with the media. They'll meet all their deadlines for both print and visual media, and they're only going to get to see us once a day. We'll do individual interviews later on if we need to, but we're not going to reward these guys with a press conference every time there's a shooting. It's just going to be a set time every day. When it was slightly after noon each day, and that helped us quite a bit. It helped us prepare for it. So after that woman was shot, the FBI SAC, Gary Bald, he was brand new as the SAC. He had gone out to IACP and came back. So he joined us. He joined us the day on the following Monday. The child, Iran Brown, was shot going into school. I think he was about 12 years old, 10 or 12 years old at the time. He was shot walking into school. Fortunately for him, he lived. The doctors did a great job. But at that crime scene, that's where the first link that we found that these guys were listening to what we were saying at the press conferences. So early on, Chief Moose and I and our PIOs, and we started talking about what's motivating these guys. So let's just try some subtle words that we use and see if we can draw them out. And one of my assigned things was when I could get it in, I would say, I don't know why on God's earth somebody would do something like this. And Chief Moose would have a couple other things. I'd have a couple other things to slip in. And sure enough, after this child was shot, the death card, the tarot card was left behind. Mr. Police, call me God. Do not release this to the press. So that we knew now that they were listening to the press conferences. So we then changed our strategy where how we're going to hold our press conferences and try and communicate with these guys to try and draw them out and find out what their motive is, and also obviously to catch them. So the FBI SAC, Gary Ball, joined us after that shooting, and he was, again, new to the area, hadn't met any of the people, including myself. So he jumped right in with us, and we came up with a strategy that, despite the pressure that we were getting, that the FBI should take over, that 3 heads are better than 1, and this was still a local case. We were going to try and keep it that way, and we would just assist any way we needed to. So then we started to get the behavioral scientists and the negotiators meeting with us every day before our press conferences, and they would ask us, the negotiators are saying, say these things, engage them. The behavioral scientists go, no, don't say, you're going to set them off. So it was like I said, it was like the devil on one side, the angel whispering in your ear, what are we going to say? Because they both told us different, totally the opposite. So we said, okay, guys, thanks, we got it, leave. And then the 3 of us would talk with our PIOs about, here's how we're going to handle this. And, the public sentiment now was turning against law enforcement. You weren't enough. The shootings keep happening. You don't have any leads. So our PIOs were instrumental there. They would kind of weigh what butt kicking we're going to take when we went out. So if we knew they were going to come at us that we weren't doing enough, we were proactive, came out and said, today we've processed X number of leads. We did this. We have over 1,000 people working on this case 24/7, and we just bombarded them with facts that took the wind out of their sails so they couldn't put us on the defensive. We did make an agreement that we were not going to deceive the press. We were going to only withhold what we had to, that we needed the media and the public to help us solve this, because doing it ourselves, it wasn't likely to happen. So, that's when I'm trying to think the next shooting. Then there was one that happened down in Fredericksburg.
How many shootings are we up to at this point?
At this point, I think there are 6 killed.
Wow.
And 2 wounded.
Wow. And there was nothing like this before in the United States, where you had these type of, in a sense, it was an active shooter, but was periodic type of
and cross jurisdiction.
Yeah.
We had 12 local departments working on this, 2 state police agencies, like 5 federal agencies that were all involved in this task force. So, it was getting tough to all the information. We decided, and we made an agreement with all the chiefs. Number 1, if you have a homicide or a shooting in your jurisdiction, you, the chief, are the lead in that. And that the task force, and I called it the center of the wheel, was up in Montgomery County, where the federal agencies and the hub of the task force was. Each site where a shooting occurred was off on one of the spokes of the wheel, had their own information. However, all the information was centralized at the task force. It was important that we felt that each chief, whether it was a he or she or sheriff, was the person who was going to be a spokesperson to the persons living in their area. People were saying the Fed should go out front, and Gary Ball, the SAC, and I agreed that nobody wants to hear from people they don't know. The people know and trust their sheriffs and chiefs. More importantly, we made sure the chiefs and sheriffs were always out in uniform. And that was a confidence booster for people. And I've likened it to during the Gulf War or the Iraq War. If the Secretary of Defense stood up in a suit and started telling you what the battle plan was, you're kind of just, yeah, okay, right. But when a 4-star gets up in the BDUs and describes the battle plan, you've got a lot more confidence and what the outcome's probably going to be. And that was important with all the chiefs. Some were elected. It was an election year. And a lot of the chiefs, it was very, we knew that was important. And that's what so the feds you don't always see, don't realize the importance of how important it is for a local chief to be the out front person. So that was agreed upon, and that worked well with all the police departments and sheriffs. Could have done a better job sharing information and communications. That was one of the lessons learned. But going back to your point, I went on with one of the news people, and they asked, what do you tell your kids? And I said, look, there's no playbook for this. None of us have ever experienced anything like this, nor has the area. The public just went through the anthrax scare in D.C., then we had the 9/11 attack in 2001, and now we have this. People were scared to death about, one after the other. How do we deal with this? So, that was a tough one for all of us. Even one of them asked, what do you tell your kids when you go home at night? I said, well, my kids were in high school. I said, well, when I do see them, they're usually in bed by the time I get home for a few hours. But you just got to tell them the good guys are going to win. This is not, not the norm here. None of us ever dealt with this kind of.
How many white
none
trucks
of us ever
did you count?
Oh yeah, anybody who had a white box truck was getting stopped. In fact, you'd go by Mako, Earl Scheid, the paint auto body. You see line out front of white trucks and vans, and then the back they're all coming out red and green and blue.
What was that you started to say? I think you started to say before is that where did that lead actually come from?
The white box truck. Someone saw a white box truck supposedly speeding from the scene at one of the early shootings. And it was important. And this was when it was just Chief Moose and I. We talked about, do we put that out there because nobody knew it was associated with the shooting. However, it could be an important lead. So we decided we're going to put that out there. We had composite drawings done of a white box truck.
You didn't realize how many white box trucks there are in the United States.
There are thousands and thousands just in that area. So, but we did caveat it to the people. Look, this is something that somebody saw. No, that we can't tie it to a shooting. Anytime there's a shooting, use your eyes and ears, your senses. But what I call a groupthink took over with the public. And you could see it from the leads that came in. Anytime there was shooting, all the calls would come in saying, I saw a white van leaving the scene. Yeah, but what else did you see?
Is it true that in one of the very first shootings, a witness did provide on a police report an accurate description of the car that winds up being involved?
Yes, when the gentleman in D.C. was shot, the Malvo and Muhammad had been stopped earlier that night by a D.C. policeman. We didn't find this out until later, just for a traffic issue. Didn't get a ticket. They just told him move on. The shooting occurred. Some of the police responded to that shooting. There was a stolen car chase through the area with another blue car, and a witness did say, "Hey, I saw a blue car speeding away." People attributed that to the car chase, when in actuality it was Muhammad's car that was actually leaving the scene. And the issue that we had there was back then, all agency traffic cameras, all police information, all stayed separate in each jurisdiction, and it was not retrievable very easily. And if it was retrievable, it usually took 3 or 4 days to get it. The other shootings overtook the whole thing, and that part fell through the cracks. It's unfortunate that nobody ever picked up on that. We didn't find out about that until the case was over, that car had been seen. And how bad do you think we felt after that?
But how typical that is. I mean, that's like what cold case investigators do. They go back over every report and they look for the little things that might not have been followed up on. And just, it's really more typical than not. Although today with technology, I don't think you had license plate readers back then or cell phone tower analysis. You guys were really flying by the seat of your pants back then.
Yeah, and since then, obviously, and that was one of the lessons learned. Hey, the law enforcement needs to be able to have all this information. All the dots need to be connected much quicker than they were before. These guys had been stopped, I think, 5-6 times, including up in Baltimore by a police officer that Malvo later told us that he was sleeping in a dumpster. The police officer approached Muhammad sleeping in the car. Malvo had the gun aimed at the police officer that if he was going to do anything, they were going to shoot him. And the officer just said, "Hey, you can't sleep here, move on." And they got up and left, and nothing happened, fortunately for that officer. But
Wow.
those are the kind of things we didn't find out until the case was over. I'm trying to think where I left off. We had all the media that we were dealing with, and then the biggest problem we had were the leaks. We couldn't go a couple hours before what we had information on was getting leaked out, and we were trying to figure out what the source of the leaks were. We found the media had set up long distance cameras, and they had showed a whiteboard with different names, and we're up on the second floor. Like, how did they get? Well, they had set up some long distance cameras from another building, and then we also found tape recorders outside in the bushes outside where people were going out for smoke breaks that the media was placing and then eavesdropping. Yeah.
No way.
So we had to stop, and we also found the media following the task force members going to meals. So we had to stop because they were sitting in the next booth listening to them, talking. So we had to stop everybody leaving for meals and bring meals into the task force. And everybody, you go to your hotel and back, stay out of the bar, stay out of these other places because they know who you are, they're following you, and they're going to try and pump you for information. So that became an issue, and then of course the self-proclaimed media experts were tainting the public's view that this has to be a trained military or law enforcement sniper. That's exactly who you should be looking for. Some so-called self-proclaimed profilers who claim they were all kinds of other titles got on saying, it's going to be a white male, this age, this is how they were brought up, this is what you look for. And, we were then having to go out and do our press conferences to try and divert the public back. Use your eyes and ears. Do not, focus and get tunnel vision. So that was the battle we were having. And then, again, you'd see a shooting happen and the leads come in and the people would just say, "Hey, I saw this white male, this age group. He used to be in the military." Well, did you see him do anything? No. So we had over 115,000 tips came in those 3 weeks. And I think they whittled it down to about 16,000 that had to be followed up. So anybody who had a grudge against someone, husbands, ex-wives, neighbors, were calling in, "Hey, you got all, these are the people that you're looking for." We had a lot of ups and downs in this case where we think we got the guy. We had one person who was a medical professional, and the person's father called us to say, "Hey, I think my son could be your guy. He's got this white van. He's obsessed with this case. He's got all the pictures, everything like a scary movie. And he's been out when all these things happened. We get a search warrant. Shooting happens while we're on the search warrant." So we had a lot of ups and downs, and it was tough to motivate the troops, because every day, a shooting happened, nothing would happen, and then you get a bunch of different good leads. So that was the toughest part from a leadership perspective is how to keep the troops motivated.
So what did you do to do that?
We'd go, Moose, myself, and the FBI SAC, we dealt with the political stuff, the resources, that kind of stuff. We had managers, task force managers in the task force office, and we'd occasionally go over and meet with everybody on each shift, and kind of talk to them. Look, this is the progress we're making. This is and this was one of the words I used. We're one tip away from solving this case, and that's the kind of message we gave everybody, that keep your head down, keep moving. We don't want to lose any more people. And it was tough to send. People didn't want to go home. They were working 12-hour shifts, and we had to order a lot of people to go home, get some sleep, and take some time off.
So what's the one tip, and when does it come?
Yeah, that's right.
So we had, let's see, the FBI employee was shot. One of the things that you still remember, and I'm going to get to the tip part, is when we're trying to convince the public that this is not a trained sniper, it doesn't have to be. I went with one of the national news correspondents and said, look, because she kept saying this has to be a trained military or police officer, former. I said, look, the shots that are taken with this type of firearm with a scope are not that difficult, that you would have to be an expert marksman or a trained sniper. Well, the preceding victim had been shot in the torso and lived. The next person the following day was shot in the head and killed. So, and I said that, and that was on the news. So again, were they listening? And they said, you want to see how good of a shot I am? Well, after that employee died,
Wow.
we started, the person down in Southern Virginia at a Ponderosa Steakhouse got shot. He's walking out. He's on his way home to Florida. He walks out of the steakhouse, gets shot from the woods. Fortunately, he lives. We respond. An ATF canine finds the spot where the shot was fired in the woods. On a tree next to it is pinned a note from these guys, because they were leaving us notes at the shootings now. And they would leave us notes with stars for all the victims, taunting us, do not release this to the press. Well, on that note, they demanded $10 million. And they wanted us to call them the following morning at a phone number. It was a payphone in the steakhouse. Well, this shooting happened late at night. We had to take everything for DNA, and we didn't open the thing up. It couldn't read the whole letter until about 10 or 11 in the morning. Well, the time passed to call these guys. So we had to go out and do a press conference to say, we got your message. The number you left us, fortunately, it was the wrong number. They were off by one number. But these guys got ticked. They were calling, and it was an old woman who was answering. So they thought they thought we were screwing with them. So we had to go out and do this press conference. So they got pissed. They called the local priest in Southern Virginia saying, hey, these guys are messing with us. We're calling them. They're not answering us. You tell them that we're the snipers, and if they don't believe us, we're the ones that shot someone in Montgomery. So the priest calls the tip line and says, hey, here's what some guys just called. So, meanwhile, they said, they want us to start put this money, $10 million in this bank account, and they gave us a card number, bank account number. Well, it was a stolen card, so the account had been vacated. So we tried to get the card activated again, but the bank said absolutely not. That's impossible. So we had to do this through a press conference with these knuckleheads. Hey guys, we'll try and get you your money. We don't want to say you can only get $200 at a time from an ATM back then, and you get your picture taken, but that's beside the point. So we looked at this and said Montgomery, and is it Montgomery County? So the task force started saying, okay, let's check Montgomery, Alabama. Sure enough, they had a shooting in Montgomery, Alabama. That was a woman who was shot at a convenience store as she was closing up and killed.
With a different gun, though, correct?
A 22.
Yeah, 22 long rifle, ammo, but
yeah,
a handgun probably.
Handgun, yeah. So, we there was some evidence left behind. A Gauls magazine was left behind, and there was a fingerprint found on it. So the Montgomery police ran it through all through all the databases, didn't find a match. So we then ran it through the INS database, and sure enough, we got a hit on Malvo when he came in through immigration. So now we knew, there's possible this
Wow, awesome.
Lee Boyd Malvo is possible. Now who does he run with? So then we said, who did he come in the country with? Well, John Muhammad. The same day, a guy out in Tacoma, Washington, who used to live with Muhammad, calls to the tip line and say, hey, there's a guy, John Muhammad, used to be in the military. He lived with this kid out here. They used to shoot a Bushmaster firearm out in the back into a tree stump. The kid he had with him, he used to call him Sniper. And they used to play all these sniper video games and all these other things. So the FBI SAC and I get our agents out in Tacoma, and we jointly told them, low key, nobody sees this, go out in plain clothes like lumberjacks, go to this guy's backyard, quietly cut this tree stump out, load it in a truck, and we'll get it back to
quietly.
Yeah. So this is only like an hour and a half, 2 hours after we gave this order, and someone calls us into the chief's office. And it's on MSNBC, where the FBI had put up strips, lines in the backyard, and they had all their jackets on. And then the ATF guy said, well, if their jackets are on, we'll put ours on. And it was like, we're like, what are you kidding?
You wanted to go with the Navy tree service truck.
Yeah. So it's needless to say, there was some butt chewing going on right after that. But now we said, now what do we do? Because this is all over the news. If these two guys see this, then we're going to have issues because they're just going to go in the wind. And we had never said we knew exactly the type of, we gave a general round, the type of round we were looking for, but we never really said everyone was linked to the same gun until later on. So now we said, now we got a problem because this is out and these guys are going to see this. So, we then looked into John Muhammad, and John Muhammad was a prohibited person because of domestic crime of violence. So we looked and saw that he had pawned a gun, a Bushmaster 223 at a gun store in Tacoma. So we went to the gun store, got all the paperwork, showed that John Muhammad had pawned a gun. It was in possession, a prohibited person in possession. We got a warrant for John Muhammad based on that. We got a material witness warrant for Lee Boyd Malvo for the shooting in Montgomery based on his fingerprint being left at the scene. So now we're looking for the two guys, that we had them in our sights. The following day, the bus driver in Montgomery County gets killed.
Where was their last known area that they were residing?
They had resided up until February up in the Tacoma area.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So 9 months later, they're now in the DC area, but they were living out of the car. And,
what was their reason to go from Washington to DC? Was their family or?
Muhammad's kids were taken away from him, and they were living in Maryland with his ex-wife.
Mm-hmm.
So he claims that's why he's going back to that area. So now we have a warrants for these two guys. Then we sit and find out that Muhammad had bought a car from a used car lot up in Camden, New Jersey, an old police car. So now we had a car description. So we put all this together, and this is where it got to the point where, we had a lot of people who were threatened to be vigilantes to go out and find these guys. So we had all this information. We knew they were listening to us in press conferences. We knew it was a matter of time before the media, this was leaked, what we were looking for. So we had a discussion between Chief Moose, myself, and the FBI SAC. If we release this, we risk these guys seeing it, that now we know who they are. They're going to go in the wind. They're going to get rid of the gun. Those are the risk factors of releasing this. Risk factor is it's going to get leaked. The other risk is there's a lot of vigilantes out there who have been looking for these guys. Who knows what they'll do? It might shoot an innocent person and, whatever. So our decision was made, let's hold off another day. However, within an hour or two, it's on the news. And we later find out another federal agency, unbeknownst to us at the time, decided they would release it. And it wasn't us or the FBI. It wasn't an agency that wasn't as a task force leader. And this person later wrote about it in a book that he went and did it and is proud of it. Well, it worked out fine in this case, but there could have been other repercussions, and there was certainly protocol that should have been followed. But beside the point, that goes out later in that night, about 30 miles north of Montgomery County, in a rest stop in Maryland, rural Maryland. A delivery driver goes in to use the rest stop and sees this Muhammad's car, which he saw on the news, parked in a dark corner. He then calls the police. State trooper nearby comes, drops, swings in, blocks the entry and exit. They call for SWAT, and a SWAT team, goes out, and they flashbang the car, take the two guys out, and arrested them.
Were they sleeping?
They were both asleep, and of course they tossed the flashbang inside the car. That they weren't going to be able to do much, except their ears were probably ringing for a couple of days. But so they took him into custody, and I had gone home to try and get a couple hours sleep, and I know I got called at about 2 a.m. Great news. They said, "Do you want to come out?" I said, "There's nothing I'm going to do. Tomorrow is going to be the busy day." So I don't know how I did it, but I fell back to sleep for a couple hours. And then we all met the next morning, and then we said, now, we've got to do the search warrant on the car. They already saw in a cursory search that the firearm was there. It's going to be a media frenzy day the next day. And the next day, we also found out that all the jurisdictions would be fighting over who was going to prosecute the case. So we had used federal search warrants to try and keep it, consistent when we were getting search warrants throughout this case, and we did that also in this case too. And that morning when we retrieved the firearm after we got the search warrant for the car, it went to the ATF lab. Our firearms expert, who did an outstanding job through this whole thing, took his time and went through every round that had been fired in all the shootings. And, I was calling him like 4 or 5 times during the day because we were getting pressure from the White House, from the media. Are these the guys? And we had agreed that we were not going to say these were the guys until we could match up through forensics that this was the firearm used in all the shootings. So throughout the day, those were the things that we worked on, and what's our media strategy going to be, and then we were still dealing with all the other issues of now who's going to get the arrest warrants for these guys, because we took them in federal the night they were picked up. But we took them to police stations, and when Malvo was brought in, they left him locked up in a room and cuffed. They come in, they find him up. He got loose and went up into the ceiling, tried to escape. So then there was a discussion over who's going to prosecute the case, and Attorney General Ashcroft was in charge at the time. And he agreed that this is going to be a local case. The murders, that's the more appropriate charge in each of the jurisdictions. So they decided they were going to let Virginia. Well, Alabama said, "Look, we can connect them to the shooting here. We got a death penalty. We'll have them convicted in no time at all, and the executions typically take 1.5 to 2 years." So we're like, okay, thanks. Thanks. We'll take that under consideration. But we had the strongest case in both Virginia for the murders in a gas station in Prince William County and the FBI employee in Fairfax County, as well as a murder in Fredericksburg and another wounding. And they would be tried in Virginia. So Maryland was pretty upset. Saying, "Hey, wait, most of the shootings happened here." But at the time, Maryland really didn't have a death penalty, and I'm not saying that had was a final decision maker where they would be prosecuted, but Virginia it was known for using the death penalty when it was appropriate. So I think, judging by the climate at the time, political climate, that was where they decided to go. So, they obviously they were both convicted. Then they moved the trial up to Maryland, convicted them on the same charges there.
But
Malvo,
you learn a lot more about their activities.
yeah,
At this point, that these guys are more mobile than you even believed up until this point.
yeah. Actually, they did more murders before this crime spree in the DC area. We started to track their whereabouts and found that they did another 10 murders throughout the United States and wounded another 3 people. So in this since from February 2nd up until October 23rd, when we caught them, they killed 17 people and wounded 10 people.
And were they using the same guns as they moved throughout the country? They were changing guns on every murder?
Yeah, they were using different handguns typically until they got to the DC area.
Oh, handguns! Wow.
Yeah, and what happened is that the Muhammad had pawned that Bushmaster rifle up in Tacoma, but when he pawned it, he went back in the gun store and had Malvo divert the attention and stole another one. So the dealer, when we went back to the dealer, he said, I never sold a gun to John Muhammad. Well, yeah, here's the serial number. We just trace it to you. How did he get it? Well, he pawned a gun here. Well, it's a different gun. How did he get this? So apparently Muhammad had stolen it. And this dealer had already been, his license had been revoked and for a number of compliance issues. So another person was running this person's business at the time. So they were pretty careless at the time of how they were running the store. So nobody even knew that gun was out there until they were using it and we picked it up. But up until then, they had handguns, and I'm not really sure. I don't recall where they got the handguns that they had used to do all the other shootings.
Were they shooting those long distance too, or they were a lot closer?
All close up.
Yeah.
Just walked up to rob people and just shot them. Yeah.
So they were financing their trips through robberies and then shooting people in the course of that.
Yeah.
So the big question, and maybe I interrupted you here if you were going to get to it. The big question is why?
That's still a big why. Muhammad never talked, never gave any reasons. Malvo is probably the most manipulative person that I've met and most evil, in my opinion. He continues to manipulate the media with different shows and interviews he gives. Muhammad's wife believes that Muhammad was doing all these murders in the DC area, so that he could go and kill her, and these would all be buried in the other shootings that happened in the area. I don't buy that. Malvo later says that they were doing this to create an army, to overthrow the government and all these other kinds of bizarre things, that whatever he can get the media to listen to him say for sensationalism. What I think happened is they did a couple of murders. They were getting around the country by robbing people. When this happened in D.C., we later found out, every time at a press conference, we later found out they would go into a YMCA and watch the TV, watch the news conferences. And Malvo later said all the people in there were talking about, these must be some real badasses. There's got 1,000, all these feds. Nobody can catch these guys. They must be the best criminals on earth. Nobody can catch them. So, in my opinion,
they got drunk with it was
vanity, and they were just getting off. Hearing that the president was talking about this case, Congress members were showing up at press conferences, and these guys were getting off on it, listening to people say, who are these guys? And I think that's what kept them going.
For the sake of our listeners who might not be familiar, explain the relationship between Malvo and Mohammed in terms of age and such.
Yeah, at the time Malvo was 17, but Malvo lived in the Caribbean, and Muhammad lost his job up in the Tacoma area, lost custody of his kids, then went to Antigua and a couple of other islands, and started making false IDs to get people into the United States. So Muhammad befriended Malvo's mother. He had no his father had left. Malvo's father had left. So Muhammad became a commonplace around the Malvo's household, and he kind of took Malvo under his wing. Muhammad went back to the States, took his children without consent, took them to the islands, and lived with Malvo. And his wife found out about it, had his kids brought back, and then Muhammad then took Malvo back to the United States with Malvo's mother, with phony immigration papers, is a work visa or something like that. So that's how their relationship formed. Malvo's mother, when she got to the U.S., didn't stay around long, went back to the islands. Malvo stayed with Muhammad.
So Muhammad's how old is Muhammad at this time?
I think he was about 40. He had worked. He was in the army in the Persian Gulf War. Got discharged, supposedly for fragging his sergeant and a couple of his soldiers. I'm not sure exactly all the particulars on that, but that incident is what he got discharged for, and then held a number of different jobs, and had some emotional issues. Became a very angry person.
So, not to distract this conversation, but the lady who was getting the telephone calls because the number was incorrect to the phone booth, what were they saying to that lady?
They thought they had called the task force number a number of times and it's another screw up. They got transferred to a number of different people, and they took their information, but they didn't take it seriously enough, and they didn't pass the information on, which is, they got disconnected a couple times from a bad connection, so they kept getting more and more upset, and then they'd start yelling at the task force, the operator, and sometimes they got hung up on. So they thought that the police were screwing with them. We didn't find all this out until the whole thing was over.
Now, when they called that old lady with the wrong number, right? Were they telling her they wanted to talk to the cops, or what were they telling her?
I can't remember the exact conversation, she was getting ticked off that these guys kept calling her.
Wow. And she never called the police or anything, let them know that these guys are calling me, asking me if they're cops, or I want to talk to the cops.
Gosh.
And they did go. They said in one of the calls, they said they were going to go to this ATM for this. There was a certain bank I won't name. So we had, set up surveillance on this place, and sure enough, a white van goes up to the ATM at about the time these guys said they were going to go there, and they jumped out, and there was just a couple of construction guys who got jacked up. It wasn't these guys. These poor guys got, taken out of the van. And
speaking about that, tell us about the car, the car that they got caught with.
Yeah. This is wild.
Describe the car. Talk about that a bit.
During this whole thing, we're saying, how could somebody shoot someone in a strip mall in a parking lot at night and nobody see anything? People hear the gunshot, but they never saw where it came from. So when we arrested them, we found out it was a Chevy Impala. The back seat flipped up, and you could crawl into the trunk from the back seat. And they had, above the license plate, below where the lock would be on the trunk lid, they had cut an opening, and they always stuffed a glove in there. So the opening was probably about 2 inches wide by about 3 or 4 inches high, so that they would just stick the barrel of the gun out of the above the license plate with the trunk lid just slightly popped, because they were using a red dot scope on this. So again, whenever they lined up the red dot is where the shot was going. So they didn't have a typical rifle scope. So they just lifted the trunk lid up enough for that. They had earmuffs because we're saying later on, how the heck did they shoot from inside? Well, he had hearing protection. So they would fire the shot from inside. Malvo would stay in the trunk. Muhammad had binoculars, and he was the spotter. And they would pick their target, and once they shot, they would just stay there for a few minutes. A couple of the shootings, Malvo later talked that they stayed and watched everything we did at the scene, and they had a rifle. And that was one of the things during the press conferences too. We had a strong belief we were going to be one of the targets because of all the media and all the cameras there, and it was a wide open area. That we were afraid one of us was going to get shot during one of the press conferences because it was, the perfect place for them to get some attention.
Did you adjust for that?
No,
you don't
because
have to say, okay.
No, because it wasn't going to stop much, particularly if it was going to be a headshot. But not a funny story, but it was an election year, and a lot of the politicians wanted to come and show their support at the press conferences. So we tried to discourage them, saying, hey, look, you're just going to be a target. It's going to be high likelihood you could get shot. So a bunch of them insisted on coming. We said, well, we're not going out there with you. Have at it. And then they instructed us to come out and stand behind them for their little show of support. And the person who stood in front of me was Senator Mikulski, who's not even 5 feet tall. Everybody else had a tall person. Here I am, exposed from here up. I tried to make myself as small as I could be.
So, all right. So, where are these guys now?
Muhammad was executed in Virginia.
Yep.
Malvo is serving a life term in Virginia. He's also got life sentences up in Maryland. However, the Supreme Court is looking at his case now because first he was going to get the death penalty, but then the Supreme Court ruled anybody under 18 can't get the death penalty. Now they looked at saying, can you give someone a mandatory life sentence if they were under 18? So the Supreme Court is looking at that appeal on whether or not he do it. He was convicted in state courts anyway. All they can do is to have him be resentenced. So
20 years later, the case is still going. Still goes on, right?
Still goes on. Yep.
Wow.
Incredible.
But
yeah. Wow.
What a time that was.
What do you think? Yeah. What do you think hours that you put into this over that time period? How many days was from start to finish for you?
23. It was 23 days. In fact, one of the books that was written, 23 Days of Terror. So,
wow.
Yeah, it was. We typically would just go home and get. Some of the guys stayed in hotels. I wanted to get home. I only lived half hour, 45 minutes away. Go home, sleep for 4 hours, get back, and it was important. Because our families were scared to death too.
Absolutely.
I had kids in high school. All the sport had stopped, any outdoor sports. During this whole thing, when they threatened to kill more kids, they put in one of their notes, your children are not safe anytime, anywhere. That got leaked. So all the school superintendents in Maryland, Virginia, and DC called us in and asked us, should we close the schools down? We're like, that's your decision. But let me just remind you, if the kids are probably safer in schools because they're locked down for 6 hours. If they're home, they're going to be out playing around in the yard. And this had a big economic impact too, because if the kids had to stay home, the parents had to stay home from work. So there were pressures from a lot of different places. I won't say where, that you can't let things get shut down here.
Sounds like COVID, man.
Yeah, you got to keep things moving. Go out and give the area that you got this under control. That people should continue on with their lives, and again, people were just scared to death. They didn't know where to turn, and what they could do.
But in summing this up, I think that back then, because of the lack of tools in the crime-solving toolbox, I think a lot of critical information was falling through the cracks.
Definitely.
Information that probably, with the technology we have today, might not have fallen through the cracks if everybody used the technology the way they're supposed to use it. And that's the big if. Just like when people pick up the telephone call and somebody wants to talk to the task force, you don't hang up the phone on them. I mean, how do you adjust for that?
Yeah, we had, again, there was over 100,000 tips that came in, and they were just getting bombarded. And there were a lot of crazy people calling in, bizarre. So again, the people who were the operators on the phone were just inundated. It's not an excuse. It's just a fog of war. Those kind of things happen. It's unfortunate. But, to your point, Pete, I think had we had the technology, and a lot of it was developed after 9/11 and after this case, because we met with a lot of these technology companies later about, how to bring all the dots together much more quickly, all the traffic cameras and, cameras from banks and all kinds of outside buildings, car stops, all those kind of things to be able to make those more accessible.
Yeah, DNA, everything, blood.
The after action report that really spoke to sort of those task force concepts, and as you said before, like leading these team of teams, I found that to be really insightful, and I think that's helped out in many of these sort of active shooter incidents after the fact. After that event.
Yeah, the Police Executive Research Forum, PERF, did a great after action. All of us spent a lot of time with them, going through, lessons learned. And we were fortunate we could be honest with them about things. Of course, you got to be careful what you say about, liability, because people were always threatening to sue and, that you were negligent or careless and those kind of things. So, most of the information we were able to get in that report.
So what are you doing now?
Golf.
You're retired. Hey, whatever happened to Moose? Right after that, Moose disappears, right?
He wrote a book, and which I spent close to 80 hours working with the. And he got the proceeds from the book, but then he also had a movie deal, which was not part of his contract when he was still a police officer. So he had to resign as chief, and then took a number of different jobs, and then went to Honolulu went through the police academy, became a road dog from the start. No,
really?
Wow.
Is that where he is now?
No, then he moved. He's in Florida now. I haven't spoken with him, but he's apparently retired in Florida.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah. So, but yeah, he was none of the. There's several other people in the case that went off and wrote books and claimed credit for everything they did on this case. But unfortunately, I'm proud to say that the FBI and ATF, none of the people, took advantage of this situation to profit from it.
But I tell you what, an interesting story though. You should write a book on this.
Yeah, there's plenty of them out there, but again, I just there's a lot of lessons that you could get out there, but again, I just not the type to try and profit from something like this.
Right.
We've had some other guests on that when they talk about some of their former colleagues writing books, they have the same look on their face that you just had a second ago.
There's some out there that I'm like, I watch some of these shows and they claim they were the task force leader and they were in charge of this and that, and I'm like, I don't even know who you are. And some of them claimed they were a negotiator, they were a SWAT guy, they were like 5 different leaders, and it's like, you have no shame.
Wow.
It was a joint effort. There was no one person on this thing that, it was a team effort, and that's the way we looked at it.
If you had to do one thing differently, or if you wish you had known something in particular at a point in time, what might that have been?
Dig harder into all the local jurisdictions about car stops and traffic. Yeah. There were no traffic light cameras back then. If there were very few.
Yeah.
No, and there weren't ring doorbells or any of those kind of.
Very few. Pete, to your point, the technologies that exist today would have really helped out that case, right?
But what gets me is how mobile these guys were, and how many others are out there that mobile doing these kinds of things.
And we talked about this later. Had these guys used a different rifle or a different gun, it would have been that much tougher to link them. If they dispose of the gun. And what I still don't understand to this day, and I hope no terrorists or potential terrorists watch this, why terrorists don't do something like this and just go from city to city and then come back to the same city later on to terrorize neighbor cities that this stuff is happening, where you don't know where the bullets are coming from, where people are getting killed, and change the guns up and just keep moving from city to city, but always go back to another city to keep that fear going.
It does, I've said this a number of times. As you know, I write a lot about gun crime, but it's not even the effect of the gun itself. It's the effect of the fear on everyone else. And it's the fear of crime, I think, that gets people more upset than the actual violence itself, which only affects a very small number of people. God forbid, it's tragic that it does, but it's the fear that affects everyone else and makes us do crazy things.
Yeah, and you can see that the fear in the area. The night we announced that we had connected these guys, there were thousands and thousands of people outside. The media,
sigh of relief. Yeah.
Kids with banners showed up. I mean, people crying. People in the media were crying as we announced, name by name, and my job was name each individual victim that we could, and the relief from people, and then all the signs that you see on the overpasses of people just coming out in the schoolyards again, and practice for, it's just a huge relief for the people.
Incredible.
Yeah, wow. Just like they did up in Boston with the marathon bombers when they were caught. The neighbors, everybody was out on the street clapping and cheering the police as they came back.
Yeah.
Wow. What a story.
Hey, Mike, great story. And
thank you.
We can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing it with us. And
thank you. Appreciate it. Glad to do it.
I should say our audience. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Take care, guys.
And I taught him everything he knows.
That's right.
I saw your little note on that, Pete. I was going to question you on that, but
we won't talk about Pete's stories on camera.
All right, gentlemen. Hey, thank you very much, and be safe.
All right, take care, guys. See ya. Good seeing you.
Thanks, Mike.
Take care.
Later. Say hi to everybody.